100 whale sharks live in this bay, and at dawn, some of them surface. Seeing one is rare, so rare that most divers go their whole life without a single encounter. Except here. We are currently sailing through the heart of the Saleh Bay on the island of Sumbawa, Indonesia. We left at night from Labuan Jambu, a small fishing village at the heart of the island. Here, the whale shark is everywhere, painting on hotel walls all the way to the statues standing on the port. All night long, in this bay, fishermen attract fish with powerful lights. And for years now, at first light, whale sharks have been showing up. Saleh Bay stretched over more than 1,400 square kilometers. Without the bagans, these traditional fishing platforms, finding a shark here will be nearly impossible. We leave before dawn to arrive right as the fishermen are pulling up their nets. As the sun comes up, our boat tied up to a bagan, and we wait. But not for long. We get word that whale sharks has been spotted to another platform, so every boat takes off, and we finally get there. From what we see, there must be 30 people in the water, even more on the boat around us. On top of small boats like ours, every liveaboard running the Lombok Flores route stops here too. So at first, we can't see the whale sharks right away. Then, all at once, a mouth breaks the surface. And then we go in. We dive straight into the chaos and everything else disappears. They are massive. Their heads alone are the size of a person, their body the length of 2 or 3 cars. They are so huge, so beautiful, so overwhelming that it hits you like a kind of vertigo, almost panic. The swell is brutal, the space to swim is tiny, people kicking each other, everyone diving for their shot, their photo. Me included, of course. The boat tied together to one bagan are swinging dangerously in the current. One person of my group gets half knocked out by the hull. The swell is that strong. At one point, I'm just out of breath, so I take shelter under the bagan. And there we see clearly a pump pushing water through a pipe, water thick with plankton. And that's precisely where the whale sharks are, right under the jet, mouth wide open. Okay, it's time to be honest. Yes, they are being fed. To keep them right here, under the bagan, long enough for the tourists to get their photo. And the truth is, there are collisions between sharks and tourists, stress you simply cannot deny. They pass within feet of hulls pitching violently in the swell, and I'm not convinced that this is natural behavior. But before we jump to a conclusion, according to ISRA, which is a leading scientific database on sharks, they were here long before the bagans. In the Saleh Bay, whale sharks were drawn naturally by the bay's richness in anchovy, shrimps and planktons. The bagans didn't create their presence, they made it predictable, concentrated and filmable. Worldwide, the species has lost half of its population in 75 years. It's listed as endangered, and here around 100 whale sharks are tracked and documented year after year. And while illegal trade in whale sharks still goes on elsewhere in the world, here the species' survival is indirectly protected by economic incentives through tourism. Some scientists think the bay works like a nursery, a place where the species can grow up safe from predators. And for the people who live here, these sharks are a real blessing. On an island that barely sees any tourists, they are keeping a whole village afloat. But the tour operator websites always stay vague. They say the sharks show up when the bagans pull up their nets, feeding on plankton and small fish that slip out. And even if that's true, no website, no photo ever mentioned that there's actually a pump, one that keeps the sharks in the same spot for hours, just long enough for the tourists to dive in and get their photos. So, even if they come here naturally, the fact that they stay under the bagan afterwards, surrounded by boats and tourists, that part is completely artificial. They are being fed, full stop. When you think about it, it makes sense. These animals don't live at the surface. They will have no reason to stay there that long otherwise. But this lack of clarity is a real problem. It undermines the trust in an ecotourism narrative. Because this mix, active feeding, heavy crowds, is exactly what's been happening for years in Oslob in the Philippines. It's one of the most famous whale shark sites in the world, and researchers have been documenting the harmful effect of this kind of tourism there for a long time. Here, in Saleh Bay, it's still on a smaller scale. But the same ingredients are all there. A zoning plan is being studied, but it doesn't exist yet. Safety distances, no touching rules, it's all written down. But in reality, it's almost impossible to enforce because there are so many people crammed into such a small space. This activity isn't going to stop. It's a direct source of income, and nobody here wants it to disappear. And that's not what I want either. But there's clearly work to be done to make this experience safer for the sharks, more transparent for the tourists, and still profitable for the locals. And I know people here are already working on it. KAWAN Teluk Saleh, for example, a local association, spends a lot of time teaching the younger generation in the village why protecting these animals matters. But given how fast tourism is growing here, is that really enough? Personally, I think ecotourism doesn't really exist in practice. The two words contradict each other. But a whale shark that serves tourism brings in a lot more for the locals than a whale shark that gets fished. So the question remains, does the method matter if the outcome is that these whale sharks get to survive here? To be honest, I still don't know what to think about this experience here. It's by far the most magical encounter I've ever had with an animal. But yeah, if I'm honest with myself, my gut feeling is that, as things stand, my presence here did more harm than good.